The air was thick with smoke, the sound of distant explosions echoing through the landscape. The planet was at war, Earth's soldiers fighting for control of this distant world. But it wasn't just the humans involved. Aliens, creatures with power beyond anything Earth's military had ever faced, were also locked in battle. Marcus, a seasoned soldier from Earth, had seen his share of wars, but nothing like this. He crouched behind a pile of rubble, his heart pounding as he surveyed the battlefield. His helmet visor reflected the chaos around him, soldiers clashing, alien war machines firing, and screams filling the air. The human soldiers were holding their ground, but it was clear they were outnumbered. Yet Marcus was focused on something else. He wasn't just a warrior. He had a mission. "Marcus, we need you to flank them from the east." His commander's voice crackled through his comms. "We can't hold much longer." He nodded without replying, his grip tightening on his rifle. He'd been in plenty of battles, but today felt different. There was a tension in the air, something he couldn't quite place. As he moved out from behind his cover, the wind howled, carrying the scent of burning wreckage. The battlefield was a graveyard for both humans and aliens, but Marcus had a job to do. He had to protect his people. Suddenly, a flash of movement caught his eye. At first he thought it was just another soldier, but then he saw it clearly. A figure in the distance, lying motionless on the ground. Marcus paused, squinting through the smoke and debris. It was an alien. Not just any alien, but one he recognized. Her armor was royal, distinctive. She was an alien queen, a member of one of the most powerful species in the galaxy. Marcus's heart skipped a beat. She was one of the leaders of the enemy, and yet here she was, vulnerable, injured, and alone. The queen was the last thing he expected to find on the battlefield. She should have been commanding her forces from a secure location, not here, in the middle of a firefight. He had a choice: continue with his mission and leave her to die, or try to help her. His first instinct was to keep moving, to follow orders, but then something about her stillness, her fragile state, made him hesitate. He couldn't explain it, but he felt a pull, a need to do something, even if it was foolish. "Command, I've spotted the queen," he said into his comms, his voice steady. "I'm going to try and help her." "Marcus, no!" his commander replied, panic creeping into his voice. "That's an order. Leave her. It's too dangerous." But Marcus had already started moving. His boots crunched through the dirt and debris as he made his way toward her. The closer he got, the more clearly he could see her. Her face was pale, her eyes closed in pain. She was clearly alive, but barely. Blood stained her armor, and one of her legs was twisted at an unnatural angle. Marcus didn't know how she had ended up like this, but he wasn't going to leave her here to die. When he reached her, he knelt beside her, cautiously lifting her head to check for signs of life. To his relief, she was still breathing, though shallowly. Her armor was heavily damaged, and the blood around her wound suggested she'd been shot. "Stay with me," he whispered, though he knew she couldn't hear him. There was no time to waste. He had to get her to safety. Marcus gently but firmly pulled her into his arms, cradling her as best as he could. The weight of her body felt heavier than he expected. He was a strong man, trained to carry the weight of his weapons and gear, but this was different. This was a queen, an alien leader, and she was completely vulnerable. The weight of her responsibility and her life now rested in his hands. As he stood lifting her higher into his arms, he couldn't help but notice how delicate she felt against him. She wasn't the towering, intimidating figure he had seen on the battlefield. She was just a woman, injured and broken like any other. The sight of her in his arms, so helpless, sent a strange feeling through him. Something that he couldn't name, something between guilt and protectiveness. With each step he took, Marcus kept his eyes on the surroundings, scanning for enemies. The battlefield was no place for a wounded queen, and the soldiers of her empire would be searching for her. But Marcus wasn't concerned about that right now. His only priority was getting her to safety. The noise of the battle seemed to fade as he moved, His world had narrowed to just the queen and the space around them. He didn't know what he was doing. He didn't know why he had made this choice. But as he carried her, he began to realize something. She wasn't just another enemy. She was a person, and she needed help. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps. Marcus's grip on his rifle tightened. He wasn't alone. The enemy soldiers had caught wind of the situation. "Stay down," he whispered to the queen, though she couldn't respond. There was no time to hide. He needed to keep moving. A group of enemy soldiers emerged from the smoke, weapons raised. They froze for a moment when they saw Marcus holding their queen. For a brief second, the world seemed to pause. "Don't shoot," Marcus said quickly, his voice firm but calm. "I'm taking her to safety. Let me pass." The soldiers hesitated, clearly confused. They knew Marcus was human, but they had also seen his actions on the battlefield. He wasn't just any soldier. He was a symbol of Earth's resistance, someone they couldn't easily dismiss. After a tense moment, one of them raised a hand. "In surrender. Go," the soldier said, his voice low. "But don't think this is over." Marcus nodded, his heart racing as he continued his journey. He had no idea what he was walking into. The enemy might let him go now, but that didn't mean they wouldn't come after him later. The stakes were higher than ever. Yet for now, all he could think about was getting the queen to safety and figuring out what to do next. As he moved further away from the battlefield, the sounds of war grew distant, and for a brief moment, it was just him and the alien queen. He couldn't explain why he had made this choice, but he knew one thing for sure. This wasn't the end. This was just the beginning of something that would change everything. Marcus carefully carried the queen, Zalnara, through the dense smoke and debris of the battlefield. His boots crunched softly on the uneven ground as he moved, his focus sharp despite the exhaustion starting to settle in. The weight of her in his arms was heavier than he expected, not just physically, but emotionally as well. She was an alien, an enemy. Yet in this moment she was nothing more than a fragile, wounded creature, vulnerable and in need of help. His mind raced as he moved. What was he doing? Why had he decided to help her? Marcus had been trained to think strategically, to focus on the mission. This wasn't part of the mission. This was dangerous. There were consequences. He had just risked his life to save the queen of the alien empire they were fighting against. The same queen whose soldiers were surely looking for her. Yet, despite all the reasons not to help her, Marcus couldn't bring himself to leave her behind. The image of her lying on the battlefield, unable to move, kept replaying in his mind. He had been in countless battles, seen countless deaths, but something about her stillness, her vulnerability, stirred something deep within him. Zalnara's breathing was shallow, a faint rasp in the quiet air around them. Marcus glanced down at her face, her eyes still closed. Her skin was a soft, pale shade of blue, her features sharp yet delicate. The blood on her armor, dark and sticky, stained the once beautiful metal. He wasn't sure if she would survive, but he wasn't going to let her die alone. They needed to get to safety. He had to keep moving. Marcus pushed through the exhaustion in his limbs, focusing only on the task at hand. He had no plan. He didn't know where to go, but he knew he couldn't stay here. He couldn't risk being caught by the enemy, especially with Zalnara in his arms. She wasn't just any alien. She was the queen. Her people would stop at nothing to retrieve her, to punish anyone who dared defy them. "Stay with me," Marcus whispered to her, though he knew she couldn't hear him. His voice was barely audible over the sounds of distant explosions and the wind howling across the barren land. There was a hidden cave nearby, one that Marcus had spotted during the battle. It was a place he had used for cover in previous skirmishes. It wasn't ideal, but it would have to do for now. He made his way toward it, moving as quickly and quietly as possible. When he reached the entrance, Marcus carefully lowered Zalnara onto the ground, making sure not to jostle her too much. He could see the damage to her armor more clearly now. There was a deep gash along her side where the wound had likely caused the most blood loss. The rest of her body appeared to be in rough shape, but she wasn't dead. Yet Marcus kneeled, beside her, his heart pounding in his chest. There was a moment of silence before he spoke again, this time more to himself than anyone else. What now? His first instinct was to try to fix her wound, but he wasn't a medic. He wasn't trained for this. He had only basic first aid training, and that wasn't enough to save a wounded queen. Yet, leaving her alone was not an option. Marcus scanned the area around him, looking for anything that could help. The cave was small, dimly lit, but it offered shelter from the chaos outside. The only thing he had at his disposal was his medical kit, and he didn't know if it would be enough. Taking a deep breath, Marcus reached for his kit. As he worked quickly to stabilize her, he realized just how strange the situation was. He had never imagined himself in a position like this. A human soldier, sworn to protect his own people, now trying to save the... The night passed slowly in the cave, and Marcus kept watch over the queen. Zelnara lay motionless, her breathing shallow but steady. The cool air inside the cave offered a brief respite from the scorching heat outside, but it did little to ease the anxiety gnawing at Marcus's mind. He had no plan, no idea what to do next. All he could do was wait for her to wake up. It wasn't long before Marcus's thoughts turned to the battle that had raged outside the cave. The human forces had pushed forward, but victory seemed uncertain. There had been no word from his commander, and Marcus wasn't sure if his comrades even knew he was still alive. His radio had gone silent, and he had no way of knowing if they would come looking for him. But it didn't matter now. For better or worse, his world had narrowed to this: the queen lying before him and the strange growing bond he felt toward her. Suddenly, a faint groan broke the silence. Marcus snapped to attention, his hand instinctively reaching for his rifle. But as he saw Zelnara's eyes flutter open, his tension eased. She was alive. Her gaze was unfocused at first, her sharp features contorted in confusion. Slowly, her eyes found Marcus and she froze, staring at him with a mixture of wariness and disbelief. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Marcus, unsure of how to act, stayed where he was, crouched at her side. Zelnara's breaths were still, shallow, but she seemed to be regaining some of her strength. She shifted slightly, testing her limbs, but a sharp intake of breath told Marcus that the pain was still there. "You saved me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Marcus nodded, though he wasn't sure what to say. He wasn't a healer, and he wasn't exactly comfortable in her presence, but he knew he couldn't just walk away. "I had no choice," he replied quietly. You were about to die." Zelnara looked at him, her expression unreadable. There was a long pause before she spoke again. "Why?" The question hung in the air, heavy with meaning. "Why did you save me, human?" Marcus shifted uneasily, unsure of how to explain it. His answer had nothing to do with orders, strategy, or duty. It was something deeper, something he couldn't put into words. "I couldn't leave you there," he said slowly. "It wasn't right." Her eyes narrowed, studying him with a calculating gaze. It was hard for Marcus to tell if she was angry or just confused. The queen, despite her injuries, still carried herself with an air of authority, and it was clear that she wasn't used to being in such a vulnerable position. Zelnara shifted again, this time with more effort. "You've broken the laws of my people," she said, her voice tinged with a cold finality. "My soldiers will come for me. They will find you. There is no mercy for one who defies the queen." Marcus's heart skipped a beat. He had known this was a possibility, but hearing her say it aloud made it real. He had jeopardized everything by helping her. Her people would not forgive him. "I know," Marcus replied, his voice steady, "but I didn't have a choice. I couldn't leave you to die." For a moment Zelnara said nothing. She seemed to be weighing his words, considering him with a look that was almost human. He had expected anger or disgust, but instead he saw something else, something softer. Perhaps it was the vulnerability she had shown when he first found her. Or perhaps it was the fact that she was still alive because of him. But whatever it was, it caused her to pause. "You are strange, human," she said finally, her voice tinged with curiosity. "I have never known one to act in such a way." Marcus shifted uncomfortably but didn't respond. What could he say? He didn't have a grand explanation. He had acted on instinct, on something deep within him that told him to save her regardless of the cost. "You will not survive the consequences of your actions," Zalnara continued, her gaze shifting to the cave entrance. "My people are relentless. Once they know I am missing, they will search for me. And for you." Marcus swallowed hard. He knew she was right. Her people would stop at nothing to find her, and he would be the one they blamed. But he couldn't undo what he had done. He had saved her life, and that was all he could do. "Then what happens now?" Marcus asked quietly. "What do we do?" Zalnara closed her eyes as if considering her options. For the first time since Marcus had found her, she seemed uncertain, vulnerable. She wasn't just the commanding queen of a vast empire anymore. She was a person, someone who had been saved by a human soldier, someone who was now caught between two worlds. "Your world and mine are at war," she said softly, almost to herself. "We are enemies. But I owe you my life. For that, I will offer you something in return." Marcus looked at her in surprise. "What do you mean?" Zalnara met his gaze, her eyes filled with a strange, intense resolve. "I can offer you protection. If my people find us here, they will not show mercy. But if I return, if I tell them that you saved me, they will listen to me. I am their queen. I have the power to protect you. For a time." Marcus blinked, trying to process what she was saying. "You would protect me?" Zalnara nodded slowly. "I would, but you must understand the protection I offer comes with a price. You will have to follow my orders, help me return to my people, and allow me to regain control of my empire. I will be indebted to you, and you will have a place at my side, but only if you are willing to follow me into my world." Marcus was silent for a long time, considering her offer. He had never expected anything like this. The queen was offering him a chance to survive, but it came with conditions. Conditions that tied him to her people, to a war that was far from over. But at the same time, he couldn't ignore the strange sense of responsibility he felt toward her. She was his prisoner in a way, but she was also the one person who could ensure his survival. The war had brought them together, and now it seemed that only by standing with her could he hope to survive the war that had claimed so much of his life. "You want me to join you?" Marcus finally asked, his voice soft. Zalnara's gaze softened, and for a moment, she almost seemed human. "Not join me, human. Help me. Help me survive, and I will make sure you live." It was an offer Marcus couldn't refuse, not if he wanted to live. But it was also an offer that tied him to something far greater than he had ever imagined. The galaxy was vast, and the Queen had the power to shape its future. His future. "You have a deal," Marcus said quietly. Zalnara's lips curled into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "Good. Then it is settled." As Marcus sat back against the cold stone of the cave, a new chapter of his life began. One where the lines between enemy and ally were blurred, and where survival meant forging an unexpected bond with the most powerful creature in the galaxy. The days that followed Zalnara's awakening were filled with a mixture of uncertainty and quiet tension. Marcus stayed close, keeping watch over her as she recovered, although the Queen still appeared weak. Her body was healing, but she hadn't regained her strength entirely. She didn't speak much, and Marcus respected her silence. In their quiet moments, they both seemed to reflect on their circumstances, understanding that nothing would ever be the same. Despite everything, the one thing they both knew for sure was that their time in the cave was running out. The longer they stayed hidden, the greater the risk of being found. Zalnara had made it clear that her people would stop at nothing to find her, and every day they spent in hiding brought them closer to danger. "How long do you think we can stay here?" Marcus asked one evening, his eyes scanning the cave entrance. Zelnara was sitting across from him, her eyes closed in quiet thought. She had begun to regain some of her former composure, but the look of vulnerability still lingered in her eyes. She didn't answer right away, but when she finally spoke, her voice was calm and calculated, like the queen she was. "We can't hide forever," she said. "My forces will find us eventually. It's only a matter of time." Marcus exhaled deeply. He had known that. He had hoped for more time, but he understood the reality of the situation. They were sitting ducks, exposed and alone in the wilderness. "We need to move then," he said, standing up from his place on the cave floor. "We need to get out of here before they find us." Zelnara looked up at him, her piercing gaze fixing on him for a moment before she nodded. "You're right," she replied. "We must go, but we must be careful. The path ahead will be dangerous." Marcus felt the weight of her words. It wasn't just the physical danger they had to worry about. There was something else, something unspoken. The bond between him and Zelnara was still new and fragile. They weren't allies, not truly. Not yet. But if they were going to survive, they had to work together. And that meant trusting each other. Marcus packed his gear quickly, glancing back at Zelnara. She was already standing, her regal figure taller than he had remembered despite her injuries. She had regained some of her strength and was already preparing to move, even though her face still looked tired. "We should head toward the forest," Marcus suggested. "It'll give us some cover." Zelnara didn't respond right away, but after a moment of hesitation, she agreed. "The forest is as good a place as any," she said, though there was something distant in her voice. "But we must be cautious. My people have eyes everywhere." The two of them set off together, moving quickly through the rocky terrain. The sky above them was overcast and a light drizzle began to fall, adding to the tension of the moment. Marcus stayed close to Zelnara, keeping an eye on their surroundings, though he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The tension in the clearing was thick, as though the very air itself was holding its breath. Marcus stood by Zelnara, ready for anything, his fingers tight around the grip of his weapon. The soldiers around them closed in, their armor gleaming faintly in the dim light that filtered through the canopy above. The commander leading them stepped forward with a slow, deliberate gait. "You are no longer welcome, Queen," the commander said, his voice cold and filled with disdain. "You have betrayed your people. You will come with us now, or we will take you by force." Zelnara stood tall, her eyes unblinking, her expression fierce. There was a calmness about her now, a determination that had not been there when they first met. Marcus had witnessed it before, the quiet power of someone who had been born to rule, someone who would not bend even in the face of overwhelming odds. "I have not betrayed my people," she replied, her voice steady and full of authority. "I have chosen a new path, one that you will understand only when the time is right." The commander sneered. "There is no new path. There is only the path of the Queen, and you are not fit to walk it. You will return with us, or we will leave no trace of your existence." Marcus could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on them both. He knew the Queen's resolve was unshakable, but they were outnumbered. The odds were stacked against them. His hand hovered near his weapon, but he knew that fighting was not the answer. It would only end in death for both of them. Zelnara turned, her head slightly, her eyes locking onto Marcus's for a brief moment. In that fleeting glance he saw something unspoken, something deeper than just survival. It was trust. And in that moment, he understood that she was not just a queen with a crown of power. She was a woman who had chosen him as her ally, even if she couldn't fully explain why. "This is your last chance," the commander said, his tone dark and dangerous. "Come with us, or face the consequences." Zelnara's gaze never wavered. She did not flinch. "The consequences," she said slowly, "are not mine to decide. But I will not go with you. Not today. Not ever." Marcus's heart raced as the tension in the air escalated, He could feel it. He could feel the weight of the Queen's decision, the weight of the choice that she had made. This was not just about survival anymore. This was about something bigger, about defying her people, about standing up for what she believed in, even if it meant losing everything. The commander's eyes narrowed, his patience gone. He barked an order, and his soldiers raised their weapons, pointing them directly at Zalnara and Marcus. Enough, the commander growled. You are making a mistake. Zalnara took a slow step forward, her posture regal and unyielding. The mistake, she said, her voice clear and firm, is yours. You are so blinded by your loyalty to a dying empire that you cannot see the truth. You cannot see what I am fighting for. Marcus watched, his breath shallow. He knew that there was no turning back now. Zalnara had chosen her path, and it was one that would not allow her to retreat no matter the cost. He had no choice but to stand by her side. Step aside, human, the commander spat, glaring at Marcus. You have no place here. You are an enemy just like her. You cannot save her. No one can. For the first time, Marcus felt something rise inside him, a feeling of protectiveness, of determination. He wasn't going to let them take her. He wasn't going to let them destroy what he had come to care for, even if he couldn't fully explain why. I'm not moving, Marcus said quietly, his voice steady but filled with conviction. I've made my choice, and I'm standing by it. Zalnara glanced at him, and this time, there was a flicker of something in her eyes, a faint approving look that made his heart swell with pride. She wasn't the cold, untouchable queen anymore. She was his ally, his partner, and together, they would fight. The commander's eyes turned to slits, his hand raised as if to strike. Then you will both die. The air seemed to vibrate with the commander's fury. In the blink of an eye, the soldiers began to advance, their weapons aimed at Marcus and Zalnara. But before they could get any closer, Zalnara moved. She raised one hand, her fingers curling into a tight fist. The soldiers faltered, their eyes widening in surprise. Then, with a swift motion, she unleashed a shockwave of energy that sent the nearest soldiers sprawling back. It was not a violent blast, but one filled with raw power, a demonstration of her authority and strength. Marcus stood frozen for a moment, awestruck by the force she had just unleashed. He had seen the queen's power before, but this was different. This was a queen who had not only survived but had reclaimed her strength. She was no longer just the leader of her empire. She was a force to be reckoned with. The soldiers hesitated, clearly startled by her power. The commander snarled, stepping back. You dare use your powers against us? He asked, his voice shaking with fury. You will regret this. Zalnara's eyes flashed with a fierce light. I have nothing to regret, she said, her voice cold. You are the ones who have forgotten the truth. You are the ones who have lost your way. Marcus's pulse raced as he watched the standoff unfold. He didn't know what would happen next, but he knew one thing for sure. Zalnara was not going to back down. Then, something unexpected happened. The commander, though furious, seemed to pause, his expression shifting from anger to something else, uncertainty. The soldiers behind him looked to him for guidance, unsure of what to do next. Zalnara took another step forward, her voice carrying with a newfound power. I am your queen, she declared, her words cutting through the tension. And if you will not follow me, then you will be left behind. It is time for a new beginning. For me, for you, and for my people. The commander's face twisted in disbelief. You would betray your own kind for this human? For him? He gestured toward Marcus, his voice trembling with rage. Zalnara didn't flinch. I am not betraying anyone. I am choosing my own destiny. You, however, are choosing to be a part of a broken past. There was a long silence. The air hung thick with the weight of her words. Marcus could see the doubt creeping into the commander's eyes. It was subtle, but it was there. Zalnara's power, her resolve, was something they had not expected, and for the first time it seemed like they weren't sure what to do. Go back to your empire, Zalnara continued. Tell them that their queen is no longer the leader they think she is. Tell them that I am no longer their puppet. And tell them that the future is mine to shape, not theirs." The commander hesitated, his grip tightening on his weapon. Then, with a final, angry glare, he motioned for his soldiers to retreat. "You will regret this, Queen," he spat, his voice filled with venom. "You will regret this choice." As the soldiers disappeared into the shadows, Zalnara stood still, her breath steady. The fight was over. For now, Marcus looked at her in awe. "You did it," he said, his voice filled with disbelief. "You stood your ground." Zalnara turned to face him, her eyes softening for the first time since he had met her. "I did," she said quietly. "And now we have a chance to rebuild, to start again." Marcus couldn't help but smile, even as he felt the weight of their journey ahead. "What now?" Zalnara's gaze was steady, her voice filled with determination. "Now, we move forward, together." The days that followed the confrontation with Zalnara's soldiers were tense, but filled with a strange sense of anticipation. Marcus and Zalnara had made it through the first of many obstacles, but the road ahead was still uncertain. With her strength slowly returning, Zalnara had begun to plan their next moves. They couldn't stay hidden forever. They had to find a way to navigate through the enemies that surrounded them, and the galaxy that no longer recognized her as queen. Together, they moved through the dense forest, cautiously making their way toward a safe house known only to a few of Zalnara's most trusted allies. The journey was long and tiring, but with each step, Marcus found himself more and more drawn to her. He had always been a soldier, a protector, but now, in this strange world of alien politics and hidden powers, he had to rethink everything. He knew Despite everything, they had formed an unlikely bond, one forged in the fires of conflict and survival. He had saved her life, and she had given him something in return, a glimpse of a future that wasn't so simple. A future where they could stand together, not just as enemies, but as allies. Zalnara's thoughts were never far from her empire. She would never be able to escape the weight of her royal blood, no matter how far she ran. But the more Marcus learned about her people, the more he realized just how much power she truly had, not just as a queen, but as an individual. She was more than the leader of an empire. She was a force of nature. It wasn't long before they reached the small, hidden settlement that Zalnara had been seeking. It was tucked away in the heart of a dense forest, surrounded by mountains and protected by a group of loyal followers who had once served her family. The place was quiet, far removed from the conflicts of the outside world, yet it offered the protection they desperately needed. When they arrived, Zalnara was met with a mix of awe and suspicion. The people who had once sworn loyalty to her had heard whispers of her betrayal, her departure from the throne. Some still believed in her, others were unsure. But Zalnara was undeterred. She had not come here to explain herself. She had come here to rebuild. Marcus kept to the background, watching as Zalnara spoke to the leader of the settlement, a tall, stern woman named Sasha who had